Welcome and welcome back to Thank God for Grace and Mercy. Today is not reading the Bible in a year. Today's our bonus content. So we just hit 400 subscribers yesterday, and my brother-in-law is actually in town. My brother-in-law, David Anderson. This is David. So he was here, and his story is so powerful. I just was like, man, would you give your testimony for my channel? And he agreed. So here we are. So David, thank you for joining us on the
Thank you
podcast
for
today.
inviting me.
Yeah, man. So um, let's just start this out with tell me about a little bit about yourself and who you are, and maybe a little bit about kind of your relationship with God has been.
Yeah, so David Anderson, by trade, I'm a registered nurse. I've been a registered nurse for 30 years now. And just for context, back in 2017, went into leadership in a hospital, and I just received a new job offer in another state. Was very excited, high paying job, finally in a position that I wanted to be in. And we transitioned to this new city in a new state. And I had gotten a cold, summer cold, summer flu,
Yeah.
and just couldn't shake it. Right before we moved, I developed pneumonia, walking pneumonia, and went down, started my job. After a day and a half, they sent me home because I was really too sick to be there. Went to the hospital, went to an urgent care. They wouldn't do anything. Had to go to the emergency room, get the antibiotics. Went back to the not apartment. We were living in a hotel. Me and my wife, Shelly, and I believe it was a Saturday right before the end of June. Had to go back to the emergency room. I was just not getting any better. I was getting worse. Strangely enough, I wouldn't go because I'm a nurse and that's what we do. And my wife threatened me with an ambulance. And as I was in the emergency room, just for those who don't know much about the clinical part, just real quick, they did what's called a blood gas, where they draw blood from your artery. And normally your oxygen level is 80 to 160 to 100%, and your carbon dioxide level is 35 to 45. Well, when I looked at my blood gases, they're what's called crossed blood gases. My CO2 level was higher than my oxygen level in my blood, and that means I'm in pretty much respiratory failure at that point. So I realized at that point that I was in trouble. Was admitted to the hospital. After a couple of days, I became worse, couldn't breathe, wound up in the ICU that I was supposed to be in charge of. And that's when I was diagnosed with, the diagnosis is ARDS, it's adult or acute respiratory distress syndrome. And basically it means my lungs were no longer able to absorb oxygen or expel carbon dioxide. And the mortality rate on that is very high. So in my mind, from a clinical aspect, I thought I was dying. It was at this time my whole family came, my parents, my wife's parents. I had them bring my children to me. And, I told my children that I would love them always. I'm sorry I get emotional. And that I'd always be with them. Because again, I thought I was dying. I never improved. I was then flown to UAB to get a higher level of care. And after a few days, I seemed to improve. They moved me to a different ICU. And basically, everything went wrong. I couldn't breathe. I crashed, so to speak. Right before I blacked out from being unable to breathe, they put a tube in to help me breathe, put me on the machine. And when I woke up the next day, I was hooked up to what's called an ECMO machine, which is extracorporeal mechanical oxygenation, where they bring the blood out of my body, scrub the carbon dioxide off, put oxygen in it, and then put it back into my body. That's a last ditch effort. About a 50% mortality rate on that. So this is compounding with the high mortality rate from the original diagnosis. Couple of days went by and things seemed to be going well, and then things again went horribly wrong. I could not breathe. Imagine taking a towel, just a hand towel, soaking it full of water, folding it over a couple of times, and hold it over your mouth and breathe. But you can't take it away. And it was at this point in time, after a couple of days of this, that, and we'll stop here and we'll go back in time. I was born and raised in a church, Christian, and several years before this event took place, I kind of turned my back on God, walked away from the church. I probably hadn't been to church in 8 to 10 years, Tony, I think. Definitely hadn't prayed in that length of time. And it was at this moment that I said my first prayer in probably 8 years. And I remember this prayer. I don't remember a lot about that experience, but I do remember this prayer. And I prayed, Father, forgive me of my sins. I repent of my sins. Bring me home. I'm ready to go. I can't do this anymore. It's too much. It's too painful. Please let me die. Just accept my repentance and bring me home. Things seemed to not improve for a long time. And it was during this time that a lot of things were very hazy. People came, people visited. It was during this phase that my family was told that they were just going to keep me comfortable, that there was nothing more they can do. And this went on for, Tony Mike can help me with this, at least a week or more.
Oh, yeah.
And then one day, the doctor was looking at the chest x-ray and said, oh, the tube that brings the blood has slipped and it's not working very well. And so they pulled that back and my oxygen levels improved dramatically. My breathing improved, but at this time I was still kind of out of it. And they were talking to my wife and mentioned that, we don't know what's going to happen. This has improved a little bit. His lungs have improved a little bit, but we're afraid he might have a brain injury from lack of oxygen. And this is, her response was, well, how would we know? Because I'm kind of a weird person anyway. But this was a hard time for my family in general, my children, my wife, my parents. They didn't know what to expect. Were really not given much hope. Now, these are things I don't remember, but I've been told. Somehow, my situation kind of went international. My mother and father-in-law knew some people that had been through something similar, and they were telling people all over the world. He was in the military at one point, so they knew people everywhere. And my wife would tell me, you would be doing really bad, and they would put out on Facebook, social media, oh, things aren't looking good, please pray. And then I would improve. And it really unusual. So things continued to improve. During this time, there were 2 other people on the unit who were on the ECMO, both younger than me. They died. They didn't make it. And I was the only one that made it. And I never could figure out why. And finally get out of the hospital and go home to my parents' house. And it was at this time, as I was improving, and you got to understand, I'm in between jobs. I had quit one job and I was just starting another one. I lost my insurance because I never didn't work long enough to pick up insurance. So we're paying a large COBRA fee to maintain insurance. I have no benefits. I have no income. Everything is just perfect storm. So I seem to be improving, and we decided, okay, I'm coming off the oxygen that I'm on at home. Let's go back to the job, which was still there for me. So we moved everything into an apartment in this new city, in this new state, and I kept getting worse again. Having trouble breathing, oxygen levels going up. Go to see my doctor there that took care of me, and they got me in to see a rheumatologist. Now, you consider this is a small little town in Georgia, and I went into this woman's office, and she diagnosed. They never could tell me why this happened. They
No.
never did diagnose me with what caused it. And is what I call my first realization of how God's plan never makes sense. It just doesn't make sense. You can't figure it out. This doctor, young lady, gave me a diagnosis within 5 minutes of seeing me. She told me exactly what was wrong with me, started me on treatment, and I was like, no, that's not possible. And I'd been at UAB for 2 months, and so I started treatment. But at that time, the money was gone. All of our money was gone. I didn't know when we would be able to. I didn't know when or if I'd ever be able to go back to work. I'd been told already by the doctors that I would need to be on disability. So we had to make a decision, and the decision was I had to call the hospital and tell them that I was not going to be able to continue. There was a neighbor that Shelly, in the couple of weeks we were there, got close to or talked to, and we sold everything we owned for $500. Everything. Just to be able to leave. And that night, after that happened, was the first time in my life that I ever contemplated suicide. I was convinced that my family would be better off with me dead than taking care of a sick man for the rest of his life. I didn't go through with it, obviously, but that was the first time that I ever really considered ending my own life. Fast forward, we pack up what we could. We moved down with my wife's parents. Started with the medication I was taking, started to improve a little bit, came off the oxygen, was getting out, doing more, building up my strength. I mean, I think I'd lost 100 pounds during that time. And you started looking for jobs, couldn't get a job. Nobody would, I'm walking with a cane, you can look at me now, but I was just this wasted away human being trying to shuffle into these jobs. We drove up to Tuscaloosa, which is where my parents live, and I interviewed for a job at one of my old companies, and just didn't go well. Matter of fact, at that point, I'd started getting worse. I'd weaned off some medications too quickly, and I could feel myself getting worse. I did the interview, and I just knew afterwards that it wasn't going to pan out, and we were getting ready to come back down to the coast. And I remember standing in my mother's living room as we were saying goodbye, and I just started sobbing. Was just sobbing and just yelling, why does God hate me? Why does God hate me? And of course, my mother was, God doesn't hate you. I'm like, yes, he does. I know I'm not a good person. I know I'm not the person I should be. but I'm not as bad as all these other people. Why does God hate me? Just screaming and crying. And, finally settled down, drove back to Foley. And then a few months later, we moved back to Tuscaloosa. Now, what's interesting, Tony, is at this time, I still wasn't. I was still. What did Jesus tell Paul? Why are you kicking against the goads? I was still resistant to God and church. I couldn't make that leap. And we moved back to Tuscaloosa, and I think a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks went by, and we decided, let's go to church. And we were going to try a couple of churches, and just sat down in that pew, and the message was just so clear. It's like they were speaking to me. And I looked at my wife and I said, this is it. This is where we need to be. So even being sick and losing everything, all my retirement gone, everything gone, the car repossessed, everything's just gone, and I'm living off of family. Interestingly enough, I never was afraid that I wouldn't have food or a place to live. We had people, when I was in the hospital, would just give money. GoFundMe's, people just sending us money, and that helped sustain us a lot during this time. And even with all that, I was still didn't understand. I just still fighting against this religion thing. And keep in mind, I grew up in a church. I'd been in church my whole life. And once we started back in the church, people will tell you, you don't need a church.
Yeah.
You don't need a church. You just need to know God. You just need to know Jesus. I'm here to tell you, if you got a church family, there's nothing better to have those people that really pull out of you what you need to grow. And within just a month, I started teaching Sunday school again. I started, getting involved in the church. And then I believe it was right before COVID in 2020, I found a new doctor. Again, I had God's finger on this doctor in Georgia, this obscure little town that I'd never heard of, who diagnosed me. And then I go to this doctor in Birmingham who changes up all my medications. And then suddenly I'm like, I feel better than I have in years. And I go back to work finally in the fall of 2020 at a nursing home. I'm an ICU nurse. That's all I've known. And here I am working in a nursing home. And I'm like, that's not what I want to do. But that was the plan. And I went back into management, and then was able to transition to another job at the hospital in Tuscaloosa in an outpatient center. And this was all the COVID hit too in the middle of all this. And I did end up getting COVID, and we thought, I'm gonna die, and it really didn't have that big of an impact on me. And so then a couple of years go by, and I get this phone call from a gentleman I used to work with, wanting to know if I wanted to move to Huntsville to help him at a hospital. And I told him, no, not particularly. And, I don't want to come up there and do that job. I'm doing that job now. And, he wanted to know what it would take for me to come up there. And I told him, and then a couple of months later, he said, I got a job for you, come on. And so we moved. And it's not that I think God's plan was for me to make more money. That's not God's plan. God's plan, maybe, I don't know, I won't begin to try to figure out the mind of God, but I was never going to change my life. If I would have stayed in that job, I would have finished the rest of my life separated from God. And all the adversity that I went through didn't bring me closer to God. Strangely enough, it wasn't being sick, it wasn't almost dying. That didn't bring me closer to God. It was after just going to this church and meeting people and talking to people and realizing this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be in Georgia. I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be here, and I'm supposed to be 100% dependent on other people. Because I went from arrogant, look what I've done, to I want to kill myself. And then suddenly I'm surrounded by people who are trying to bring the best out in me. And my life has gotten better. I still have a lot of physical problems. Nerve damage, shortness of breath. But I've never been this content in my life. And then I realized, all those years ago, standing in my mother's living room, I was screaming the wrong question. It's not why does God hate me? It's why doesn't God hate me? I mean, I turned my back on God. I walked away. And still, He brought me through. He gave me strength. And He put me in a place and in a church that I currently go to that I'm able to continue to grow because I'm imperfect. I mean, you know that. I mean, everybody, I'm imperfect. And I make a lot of mistakes every day. But as the title of this podcast, is this podcast? What is this?
I don't know.
I don't know.
But it is thank God for grace and mercy.
That is 100% accurate because I don't deserve any of the blessings that I have in my life right now. I don't deserve God's love. God should hate me. God should not have pulled me through. I should be dead, and but I'm not. And then I realized, all that maybe God's plan is that I go through this so that I can share my story, so that other people who were told, you have no hope. There's no hope. Physically, there's no hope for you. You're too sick. You know what? There is hope. Never stop fighting. Never stop fighting, because even though, on the day that I do finally go to meet my Maker, I believe better things await. This world is a blessing, and this life is a blessing. And, don't give up. Don't give up. And if you don't have God in your life, think about it. Just think about it, because there is something very, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, soothing of being attached to a higher goal and a higher purpose. Knowing that all this that is around us is just this wonderful creation, and you're a part of it. And, I've gone from being on top of the world, I'm doing my dream job, to I'm homeless, I have nothing but the clothes on my back, to now I'm back doing what I've always dreamed of doing. and it's still a struggle every day. And also remember this, just because you think what you're going through is not as severe as what I went through, it's not a competition. Whatever's going on in your life that's having a negative impact on you, it's real. And put your faith in God and just know that no matter what you are doing, no matter what you have done in your past, there's forgiveness, there's grace, there's mercy. You just have to open yourself up to it. And that's kind of an abbreviated story.
Well, thank you so much, David. I mean, I think that's, I think we get a lot from that. And I think just like what David has says, none of us are perfect. I haven't had any guest on this show that's been perfect. I'm not perfect. David admits, not perfect. We're not even that good. And we all deserve, the wages of sin are death. And we all deserve death. But because of God's mercy, we don't get it. And because of God's grace, if we accept Jesus in our hearts and try to follow him, he accepts us as his adopted children and wants us to come home. So, David, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate
No problem.
it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you for sticking around. This is a long video. These testimonies are long, but I hope that you're able to get something out of this today. And we'll be back reading the Bible again soon. See you then.